Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oaks. Bob Oaks represents the 130th Assembly District. That includes the counties of Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego.
It does.
It does. And Bob Oaks, thank you for being here today. Thank you, folks, from throughout that region for joining us for our program. Busy time here at the state capitol. We have got budget issues to talk about today. You have been overseeing a lot of the budget hearings that have been underway at the state capitol, looking very closely at the governor's proposal. The legislature is coming up with its own budget proposals this year, and we're about to get knee-deep in the skirmish, the really heavy hitting of the budget talks here at the state capitol. But before we do, let's start with a recent piece of business that took place in the Assembly chamber, where you and some of your colleagues put forth a series of changes to the way the House operates, its own rules, if you will, and this kind of I think kind of naturally bounces off what happened at the beginning part of this legislative session, and that is the turnover in the speakership of the State Assembly. You've got a new leader, and there was a lot of talk about reforming and changing the system and opening it up, making it a bit more democratic, and it seems as if that's where you and the Assembly minority was taking things yesterday.
Well, actually, there were a few things within it. Every year we look at how the Assembly operates, and would there be some good changes that might make it work more effectively. And then we had this year the unusual situation of a speaker being forced out after having served, I believe, 22 years as the Speaker of the Assembly. And the whole process of change, what happens if there's a vacancy in that position, that raised a question. Issues of how individual members in the legislature, the allotments that they get to hire staff and whatever, discussions around there. But perhaps the thing that I think piqued to the greatest interest is the problems that emanated out of having a speaker serve so long and have control for so long. We saw that individual perhaps change and transform during that time to looking at, how does this system serve me better rather than serve the public? And we saw a speaker who ended up making a number of agreements to actually enrich himself, several millions of dollars directed his way. One of our senses is you're too long, you're in a powerful position. Should the positions of power and leadership within the legislature have some limits? And so we proposed 8-year limits for committee chairmanships, the majority and the minority leader, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the minority ranking people, so that no people end up connected to the same piece of running and really control over it for too long a period of time. Now, some people would suggest 8 years. That's a long time within a legislative life, really. But our feeling is it's not bad to have people spend a period of time there, but again, too long, problems can develop, and that's what we saw. So we really feel, as we looked at it, we did a total of 17 changes that we proposed. Some of those we've proposed before. We put those before the legislature. We're in the minority, obviously, but most of these affected both parties. They weren't directed to give the minority greater voice necessarily or power. They were a balanced approach, I think. In every case, summarily turned down by the Assembly majority. One or two of their members on a few of the things voted for them, but in essence, they said,
strict party line vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it was interesting to hear the majority leader say, well, we're the majority. We govern. You're the minority. You can dissent, and that's what you're doing today. That's fine. But the reality of it is, we're the majority. We don't have to listen.
One of the reasons...
That was a surprise.
One of the reasons New York is in the pickle it's in is that attitude as majority of, we don't have to listen to you. Well, sometimes the minority view and perspective and idea can make things better. If you're unwilling to listen, we're going to continue to not be as good a state as we can be.
Now, some people might describe that sort of attitude on the part of the majority yesterday and the way they reacted to these ideas as arrogant. And that almost is a nice segue for us to get into our discussion on the budget negotiations this year, because there are a lot of people that are using that same adjective to describe Governor Cuomo and his stance in some of the budget negotiations, because in a number of areas, a number of issue areas that are contained within the budget talks umbrella, he is saying, you're going to do what I want you to do in terms of this particular legislation or idea, or else this other thing that you want just ain't going to happen.
The governor has a lot of power within the Constitution and the case law that is provided that the governor proposes the budget, has control over the language of how those appropriations are going to be spent. The legislature can react to those. And so, in one sense, the governor gets to beat his chest a lot. The question is he going to hold firm and say it has to be my way or I'm not doing anything else? Publicly, he's been saying that. But we're now to the point in this budget process. We've had the governor's proposal. We've had budget hearings on all the different areas of the budget. I sat through 13 or 14 of those long days listening to both the department heads, commissioners from state agencies to advocacy groups who came to talk. We went through that process. Last night at midnight, we're talking here on a Tuesday, last night at midnight, the Assembly and Senate majorities put forth their one-house budget bills in response to the governor. We're just analyzing those as we are getting them. But again, the big question now is, as we have now those two reactions, the governor's budget, where are we going to go? Is the governor going to hold fast as he tried to tie TAP funding, the tuition assistance program for higher education, to an education tax credit on one side, and also on the other side to the DREAM Act that would provide tuition assistance for illegal aliens who are here in New York State. And so there's a number of issues that are out there. He has tied the professional review of teachers, and he is trying to put more of the tests that students take into that equation at a higher level as we rank and rate our teachers.
And he wants to tie that bit of business to how much aid comes out of Albany to the local school districts.
Absolutely.
And you know, I've got to figure the people in the area you represent are well aware of some of the problem schools, and Rochester's schools,
Sure.
for example, the problems they're having in terms of performance at the schools, the graduation rates and such. And I think everybody agrees here. I don't think you could go up to a state legislator and say, yeah, we really need to figure out how to get better results from certain school districts. But there are differing opinions as to how to change things and get the better results. I think that's a given too, that you're going to ask a number of different legislators and get a number of different answers. But here's where the governor is saying, no, I know the best way to do it, and you will do what I say needs to get done, or else you're not going to get the aid to local schools. It's amazing to me, the stance that he's taking on so many of the, and that's just one example of many.
Absolutely. Unprecedented in that case. And from me, but I talk to my local schools. People want to make them the best they can. The governor seems to have taken on the teaching profession and kind of hitting them over the head saying it's your fault. The educational institution statewide, represented by unions, represented by big districts, is a pretty immovable source. But my sense is I represent a lot of local school districts. I think the answer is within each community, gathering their people, parents, school board, teachers, administration, and coming together to say, we can do this better than what we are. How do we come together? The state can be helpful in providing some assets and help with it, but I don't think the state with a hammer, as the governor is trying to do, can help. And certainly if he doesn't give the schools the money that the state has, the schools aren't going to be able to do what he's suggesting we should be doing.
And to tie controversial legislation like the DREAM Act, one that would give state tax dollars towards financial assistance for the children of undocumented New Yorkers. Some people want to call them illegal aliens, whatever your verbiage might be. And to take that controversial legislation that has been reviewed by the legislature each of the last few years unsuccessfully and say, no, you will do this, or else, that TAP program that we've been running in New York State for years, done.
Or he said, we have this settlement money from some financial institutions and others, one-time dollars to spend. He said, CHIPS money, which is local highway money the state's put out. He says, I want to spend this one-time money this way. Tried to tie CHIPS to that money. You don't get CHIPS if you don't spend that money the way I want to. The governor is playing hardball on that level. But again, now the real negotiations continue. Fascinating though, Mike. And
It is amazing to see, and I think the next few weeks are going to be pretty interesting around here in terms of rhetoric and tension, and we haven't had a budget session like this here in quite a long time. A couple minutes left of the program. I want one last thing to run by you, and that's these proposals that seem to be coming out of everywhere at the state capitol to increase the minimum wage. It's almost like it's got a mind of its own. Everybody wants to one-up the other guy. It was $7 and change just a couple of years ago, and I'm hearing $8, $9, $10, $12, $15. It's made double before you know it.
It's fascinating, and of course, if you look at it just simply and say, I'm an individual, I'm working at minimum wage, would I like more money? Absolutely. But the issue, this is not just about what people might wish for. This is about jobs. It's about our competitiveness. And, if we arbitrarily try to push the minimum wage to levels, literally, we have a proposal right now by the Assembly majority that would move the minimum wage, which has gone from $7.25 to $8.75 in the last 2 years. It's going to go to $9 at the end of this year. The Assembly has just made a proposal to have it go to $12.60 statewide and $15 in New York City. Now let's take a couple quick situations, Mike. If you're in manufacturing where you have to make something and then sell it competitively against someone else, and you're doing that here today, and we have less of it because of a lot of it's been put offshore. When someone does their books at the end of the day, if they're having to pay a higher wage for maybe a low cost or something fairly not real difficult to do, they're probably going to look at that and say, you know what, now I can do this cheaper out of the country or in another state. I got to move. There goes 100 jobs from your district. You take those people out of the case. Or in agriculture, same thing. Packing the apples. If you can't do it, but Pennsylvania and Massachusetts Michigan can do it cheaper, you're going to not be able to compete with those. And so we're talking about real jobs leaving if we're talking at all seriously about this. We have to pull back, and those who would say just let's raise the minimum wage, it could have some devastating effects.
I know, you're right. It sounds simple and like everybody will be happy if you do it, but there are consequences if you do it, and people need to think that through. And I think the people that need to think it through the most are members of the state legislature, the ones that are tasked with the chance of doing it. We're out of time, but Bob Oaks, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.
And we want to, as we thank Bob Oaks, we thank you folks too for spending your time, and we'll hope to see you soon for our next Assembly Calendar.